In this follow-up video to the thesis, reasons, and evidence video, we're going to be talking about reading for the main ideas. And this will essentially start to address how the thesis, reasons, and evidence become the skeleton for a larger argument, and how that argument gets divided into paragraphs and what we'll see are called sections. So when we're looking at a paragraph, we're going to want to think about the paragraph's purpose. What is it trying to tell us? Each paragraph has its own main idea. However, paragraphs can also work together on their own purpose within the larger work, which is one way of saying, for example, that addressing one of the reasons in your argument may take several paragraphs which are collaborating together to address that reason. Some example of purposes for paragraphs, and there are more: providing background information, right? What might the audience need to know that they don't already know? And the answer to that is going to depend on the audience, So for some, if you're thinking about experts in the science field, for example, there may be some concepts that you don't have to address because it's something that they would know. But in other cases, you will need to provide a kind of foundation for your audience. You may offer context, right? Explaining the conversation the writer is entering into. We talked about context last class. What are the elements which make this paragraph relevant? What kind of information is outside of this? To offer a key point or a reason, as I said earlier, a paragraph can be its own reason, its own key point, or there can be multiple helping to support it. You can offer evidence to support a key point or reason, or to do both, right? So giving that key point and beginning to support it with evidence. To refute a counter-argument or to address a counter-argument, we'll look at that in more depth later in this class. Essentially, a counter-argument is going to be an objection from the audience, somehow trying to say that your argument is not valid or is not important. And so when we address a counter-argument, you are going to be able to say, well, that's not true. And again, we'll talk about that in more depth later. And last, to conclude an argument. So discovering sections of purpose involves when multiple paragraphs are grouped together under the same purpose. And again, I gave the example of supporting the same reason. Sometimes a single paragraph cannot be paired with others because it serves a unique purpose. And one paragraph can be its own section. A section does not need to be 2 or more paragraphs, although they often are. So look for groups of paragraphs that work together and consider why the author includes them in that section, right? In what ways are those paragraphs accumulating to a larger purpose or idea? This is part of what we call critical reading, right? So starting at the outside of the reading circle, there's general reading for pleasure. You're not really thinking so much analytically, just going with the text. Close reading is when you start to, pay attention to what the argument is. You start listening to what those reasons are and thinking about what this author is trying to persuade or convince you of, for example. It's also practicing the summary skills so that when you talk about this article to someone else, or when you summarize an article within your research paper, you sort of know how to break it down into that thesis and reasons. But again, critical reading is a big part of what this lesson is about, right? So you're thinking about those rhetorical elements from the rhetorical situation, the purpose, the author, the audience, the genre, the context. You're looking at all the elements of the article, as well as starting to think about, okay, now that I've thought about the rhetorical elements, the thesis, the reasons, how can I start to group the article based on those observations? Now in class on Tuesday, and I will explain this again, but this will give you an opportunity to start thinking towards the assignment in class. You're going to be with your groups, and what you'll first do with the Don't Blame the Eater article is number each paragraph for clarity, right? So just going through 1, 2, 3, 4, that way it's going to help you more easily group those paragraphs into the sections. So with your group, and after having numbered those paragraphs, try to figure out what paragraphs go together into sections. What are their shared purposes or purpose, and how are they accumulating? Once you've determined those sections, reread the paragraphs and think about why they belong together. What is the main point that they're trying to make? And if at some point during the process you find that you've grouped the paragraphs incorrectly, right, you start to rethink, try to go ahead and, reorganize. And then within each section, fill out the say-does chart, and we're going to look at that in class. But it's going to ask you the difference between what the paragraphs are, right? Which ones go together into sections versus why, and what the purpose is, what the author is achieving. So important steps to prioritizing those sections, right? Figuring them out. Once you have an idea of the main purposes of the section, look to see which of those sections offer the key ideas you'd want to summarize to make sure a reader understands them, right? So that includes the reasons as you identify them during the homework. You can eliminate sections that are of less priority when writing the summary. And think about how many key points or reasons did you find? Are they all of equal importance, right? So are they the main reasons supporting that thesis? How important is it that the reader understands the background information or the context? Is it of equal importance to the key points you discovered, right? So does that summary need to include some of that foundational thinking? And then determine how you could summarize each section into 1 or 2 sentences and what could be left out. So you're really distilling down to the main idea out of several paragraphs. And then determine if there are entire sections that could be left out of your summary, right? So this is the information which is helping to develop the argument, but is not a part of the main ideas. And we'll review this in class as we get ready to summarize our article in the group class activity.